The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last night, President Obama's last State of the Union address. Here to analyze, dissect, and discuss with me is host of the Ben Dixon Show, Benjamin Dixon. We are going to get directly into the first clip, a list of President Obama's 2016 goals. Only 1 year left of his presidency. Let's see what it is he hopes to accomplish.
But tonight, I want to go easy on the traditional list of proposals for the year ahead. Don't worry, I've got plenty. From helping students learn to write computer code to personalizing medical treatments for patients, and I will keep pushing for progress on the work that I believe still needs to be done. Fixing a broken immigration system. Protecting our kids from gun violence. Equal pay for equal work. Paid leave. Raising the minimum wage. All these things still matter to hardworking families.
Yeah, look at the list of stuff, Ben, that Paul Ryan apparently doesn't want to see happen, right? I mean, Paul Ryan has perfected this sort of a condescending smirk and was able to keep it up throughout the entirety of the State of the Union address. I guess none of that stuff sounds good to him.
You know, it's impossible for him to give anything to convey any type of approval of what President Obama says. So he has mastered that look.
And it's amazing when I actually look at the list. These are pretty basic things, right? What has become controversial in the United States is stunning to me, where for political reasons, Paul Ryan, he can't even give a genuine smile. Only a condescending smirk is okay, because he would be killed by his own party if he says, hey, some of this stuff doesn't sound so bad.
Right. There's absolutely nothing, no room that he can give. There's nothing he can agree on. He's pinned in a hard space where he cannot even be reasonable. And that's the look on his face.
And interestingly enough, John Boehner had the same issue.
Right.
Part of the demise of John Boehner was he wasn't as crazy as some of the others in his party, and he wanted to be somewhat reasonable in some areas, and he was pushed out as a result. Let's take a look at the next clip from last night's speech.
In fact, it's in that spirit that we have made progress these past 7 years. That's how we recovered from the worst economic crisis in generations.
Some applause.
That's how we reformed our healthcare system and reinvented our energy sector. That's how we delivered more care and benefits to our troops coming home and our veterans. That's how we...
All right, let's stop that one there. Standing ovation, right?
Right.
Care for veterans. Who is against care for veterans? Paul Ryan still cannot show any emotion. Why has it become... I'm trying to figure out how much of this is about President Obama specifically, how much of this is about partisan bickering generally, and how much of this is just this sort of a framework that has been taken against whatever government does. I don't know how to decide what's what here.
You know, I think in his position, it's just opposition to President Obama no matter what, because even if he states something factual, as in the economy has recovered, if it's an affirmative statement associated with President Obama, he'll get lambasted by his own caucus.
Yeah, and as I was watching this, and we're going to continue seeing some clips of this, when George W. Bush does a State of the Union and says the same things, right? We're not talking now about drastically progressive or conservative ideas. Supporting troops. Improving the economy,
right.
Creating jobs. Obviously, there's different levels of truth to those statements when different presidents say them, but these are not concepts that should be particularly foreign or adversarial to conservative ideology, but they seem to have become that because of President Obama.
Right. Again, and not to be redundant, but there's absolutely nothing that President Obama can do, not even kill Osama bin Laden, nothing he can do.
Which he
that
mentioned to mute it, to sort of,
Right.
there was a dull roar of applause about killing Osama bin Laden.
Exactly. There's nothing he can do that conservatives today, particularly Paul Ryan in the caucus in the House of Representatives, would give him credit for. And so if Paul Ryan even blinks the wrong way, he's at threat in his new position as Speaker.
And he was literally able to not blink for long periods of time
Exactly.
during this thing. Let's look at the next clip.
What is true, and the reason that a lot of Americans feel anxious, is that the economy has been changing in profound ways. Changes that started long before the Great Recession hit, changes that have not let up. Today, technology doesn't just replace jobs on the assembly line, but any job where work can be automated. Companies in a global economy can locate anywhere, and they face tougher competition. As a result, workers have less leverage for a raise. Companies have less loyalty to their communities. And more wealth and income is concentrated at the very top.
Okay, this is excellent, I think. I like this area because, number one, you don't often hear discussions, frank discussions, about how the sort of landscape of the economy is changing. We're talking about automation. We're talking about also the productivity from the average worker going not to their wage, but to the CEOs and the C-whatevers at the very top. Right. And he's also talking more generally about the wealth and inequality gap. So I thought this was actually a really strong part, although the crowd and something about just the tone of the speech, I think, had lulled people to sleep a little bit. I thought that was a really, really good point of the speech.
Yeah, it's rare to hear any politician delve over into that conversation in a substantive way. Bill Clinton used to be pretty good about that, about the changing landscape of our economy and how jobs that we counted on before are just non-existent anymore.
And I think it's also interesting because when you say something like that, you do open yourself up to criticism
Right.
From people saying, he's just shirking responsibility for the fact that, for example, wages have only been up slightly during the Obama presidency. We on this program have been very clear about the good and the not so good about the economy, but we're also really clear about what areas does a president have control over and what areas does a president not really have control over. And President Obama, it is his last State of the Union speech. Maybe the risk was minimal, but there is risk to saying something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. He opens himself up to, well, actually, I was going to say more criticism, but the truth is the additional criticism would probably come from the left because the right has already given every ounce of opposition and criticism that they can imagine. But I think this conversation does open them up from a left critique in terms of especially the TPP and exposing us even more to these changing factors in the global economy.
And I want to get to that. Let's talk about this next clip first. Take a look.
Middle-class families are not going to feel more secure because we allowed a tax on collective bargaining to go unanswered. Food stamp recipients did not cause the financial crisis. Recklessness on Wall Street did. Immigrants aren't the principal reason wages haven't gone up. Those decisions are made in the boardrooms that all too often put quarterly earnings over long-term returns.
All right, so let's pause it there. Another really strong part of this speech, I thought, there were sort of some highs and lows here, pointing out that the scapegoats that have been created by many on the right, and we've talked about the Trump campaign and the Cruz campaign and so many other campaigns, President Obama going, without naming names, right, directly after some of the scapegoating that exists and pointing out this is not the problem that we have here. Really strong part of the speech, I believe.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I feel like it's going to fall on deaf ears because those of us who are rather rational understand that the scapegoating is just a political ploy. But those who really believe the scapegoating, they would not receive that message from President Obama anyway.
No, they're already signed up to vote for Trump, and it's going to be hard to really change their minds. All right, let's continue.
Reject any politics that targets people because of race or religion. Let me just say this. This is not a matter of political correctness. This is a matter of understanding just what it is that makes us strong. The world respects us not just for our arsenal. It respects us for our diversity.
Yeah.
And
So now I'm confused because all of a sudden everybody's clapping. The crowd is filled with people who do want to make decisions about banning people based on religion or race or whatever. And all of a sudden everybody's clapping like, here's something we can all agree on. Not everybody in that room agreed about that.
Right. It's that dog and pony show, right?
Yeah.
They have to put on the front. They cannot not clap to this, but they would definitely pass legislation accordingly.
Is that pandering? Because at the same time, who are they pandering to? We know that there is support for the idea, for example, of banning Muslim immigration. So I don't even know why they need to put up a show. And everybody, even Paul Ryan, clap. We would never ban anybody based or even discriminate based on race, religion, or creed.
Actually, David, that's a hell of a good question because I have no idea at this point. There's so many people who support a policy like Donald Trump's that who are they pretending for at this point?
I really don't get why they needed to put that show on. Okay,
question.
let's take a look now at one of the most bizarre moments from the entire thing. Let's take a look.
reject any politics.
No, I think this is the let's,
excuse me.
Next one.
I played the wrong clip there. Forgive me.
Apology accepted. Thank
Okay.
you.
Reject any politics.
Oh, it's the same one.
It's the same one. Okay.
Now we have it.
Is this the one?
I hope.
But that means if we want a better politics, and I'm addressing the American people now, if we want a better politics, it's not enough just to change a congressman or change a senator or even change a president. We have to change the system to reflect our better selves. I think we've got to end the practice of drawing our congressional districts so that politicians can pick their voters and not the other way around.
This is a big, big moment, right? Talking about gerrymandering. Now, the problem I have with this is twofold. Number one, again, Paul Ryan doesn't clap for ending gerrymandering. Is Paul Ryan saying he likes gerrymandering? I mean, I know that both Republicans and Democrats do gerrymandering, but I thought they were at least supposed to pretend to be against it.
At this point, he is solely focused on not giving President Obama an inch. That was his entire purpose for being there last night.
The other confusion I had with this is that there is a reality that when given the opportunity, when those districts are redrawn, whichever party is able to redraw them in the most beneficial way is going to do it. Now, you could make a case and say, oh, Democrats have to do it because otherwise Republicans will do it and it will hurt Democrats. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I buy into that. I don't know everything about the history of gerrymandering, but I know that given the opportunity, both Democrats and Republicans love to redraw those districts. And the where I get to on this is the same thing as with campaign finance. Why would anyone who got into power based on the system that exists go out there and say, I'm going to change this? There are very few politicians that would do that.
Very few, and the longer they stay there, the less likely they're going to make those changes. So some of these structural problems have to come not only from a grassroots movement, but from across the nation and not our politicians.
Last thing I want to touch on, and I don't know if we have the clip, Lewis, it was Kim Davis. We do have it. Let's just take a look. Kim Davis was in the audience.
Democracy grinds to a halt without a willingness to compromise.
Yeah.
Or when even basic facts are contested. Or when we listen only to those who agree with it.
That is a disturbing image, Ben. I mean, that was the most disturbing moment. Kim Davis, this scofflaw, law-breaking, whatever from Kentucky, county clerk who just says, I don't care what the Supreme Court says, I am not giving same-sex couples marriage licenses. Why was she at the State of the Union address?
You know, I asked the same question and I dug into it, and it seems like she was invited.
Yeah.
But she was also placed in the middle of several same-sex couples.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I
just read
that
that this morning.
Congressman Jim Jordan, who of course is a Republican from Ohio, because what sane Democrat would have this woman use his or her ticket to go to this thing? He said Kim Davis used our ticket. Our staff heard from the Family Research Council. Mm-hmm. It's already a hilarious explanation. The Family Research Council communicated to this Republican that Ms. Davis and her family was hoping to attend the State of the Union. I mean, it is an embarrassment that this woman is there. She represents everything that is wrong right now with the civil rights struggle in this country, and she shows up there. And I mean, did she even enjoy it? What did she even get from it?
I don't think she could have gotten anything but airtime to say that she was there,
Right.
which would be questionable for people who support her because they would want to know why did you even want to be there with President Obama. So there's a lot of strange things happening last night.
It is absolutely bizarre. This is the last State of the Union address for President Obama. I would grade this thing a B. That's my sense. How would you grade it?
I definitely would give it a B minus, a strong C plus. Not because of content. I think he said everything he needed to say. It was just, maybe I was tired, but it felt like it was very tiring to watch, and I can't believe he's still optimistic after all these years.
Yeah, the letter of what he said, a lot of it I liked. The sort of general tone of the thing, and maybe it's because we know there's a year left, and how much are Republicans really going to allow to get him to get done, unless he uses executive action, is questionable. Lewis, as we go to break, what grade would you assign to this entire thing?
Well, understanding that I hate these speeches to begin with, and I think they're all kind of redundant, and I guess I'll go with a strong C plus as well.
A strong C plus, which I guess means almost a B minus. All right, we will take a break. Plenty more coming up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me remind you, this is viewer-supported media, and today's new member of the day is Jill Rubio. You can join Jill and read about all the great member benefits, including the world-famous bonus show hosted by producer Lewis at davidpakman.com/membership. All right, we have Hatriot Mail today. The first time Ben Dixon from the Benjamin Dixon Show joined us on the show, we had Hatriot Mail. Because it is Wednesday again, it is again time for Hatriot Mail. Let me remind you what that is.
Hey, let's face it, we're only a couple of blood moons away from a total homo-fascist takeover. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So when you were first here, Ben, the topic was very aggressive racism. That was essentially the subject matter. This time, Hatriot Mail is about guns. Let's take a listen.
I'm starting to think you two are just another couple of establishment bitches who always agree with each other on everything. It's obvious who needs to be shot in a shooting or any other crime taking place for that matter. How about shooting at the guy shooting as everyone else? If you are for gun control, then you are for outright gun confiscation. Simple as that. More gun control is directly linked to higher crime.
Lewis, you've addressed this so many times. When you're in a situation where multiple people have guns out and there's a crossfire, how could any good guy with a gun know who the bad guy with the gun is? This person is suffering from what I call the gun delusion. Christopher Hitchens wrote The God Delusion, I think, or was that Richard Dawkins? I've not read it, I admit. This is the gun delusion, isn't it, Lewis?
I think so. It's I like to say that people get this from TV and movies where the good guy with the gun always wins.
Yeah.
But yes, unless it is painfully obvious that someone decked out in some type of military gear with assault rifles and a skull mask is the perpetrator of the crime, even then there's confusion. What if there's another person with a gun who sees you start shooting at the real bad guy with the gun, but they can't see the bad guy? Now they're shooting at you, you're shooting back at them. And
the best example of this to me, Ben, is that James Holmes, Aurora, Colorado theater shooting. You've got a dark room, and the NRA insists it would have been better if more people had guns. What are more people with guns going to do in a dark room with a shooter?
Kill more people.
Exactly.
As tragic as it was, that's a recipe for disaster, but they would never admit that to themselves.
It is the gun delusion.
You know what?
Yeah.
Not only was it a dark room, but I'm pretty sure he threw either a flashbang or a gas grenade in there or something, and there was even more chaos. So not only, you cannot see anyone except probably the flash from the muzzle. And so, yes, it would have been a total disaster.
Total fantasy world mentality. All right, we have big news. I don't know if you saw this morning. We have new polling now from the Democratic primary, and things are really, really changing quickly if you believe the polls, and not everybody does. Let's look first at two new national polls, Lewis. First and foremost, we have the CBS New York Times poll, which has nationally Hillary Clinton 48, Bernie Sanders 41. The IBD TIPP poll has Bernie Sanders 39, Hillary Clinton 42, and currently the Real Clear Politics average of all recent polls nationally has Hillary Clinton up over Bernie Sanders by only about 8.5 points. This is the closest they have been in a long time. Do you buy this? What does this mean?
It means that as we get closer and and his campaign gets in full stride, more people are getting to know Bernie Sanders. Those polls that showed her with 40-point leads in the summer, and then just last month she had a 20-point lead, they're almost irrelevant at this point. So as we get closer, the competition is going to get thicker.
Let's now look for people who say, I don't care about national polls, I care about state polls because
Right.
we're voting state by state. Let's take a look at that, Lewis. First, here from Iowa, we have a new Quinnipiac poll. Hillary Clinton 44, Bernie Sanders 49. We have a new PPP poll. Hillary Clinton 46, Bernie Sanders 40. And we have a new ARG poll. Hillary Clinton 44, Bernie Sanders 47. Let's just look at an average, though, because that's what matters. The Real Clear Politics average of recent polls has basically a dead heat. Clinton 45.5, Sanders 45.3. Looking at New Hampshire now, after Iowa, which is the second primary. In New Hampshire, we have a number of polls, all other than the PPP poll, which is widely considered a sort of Democratic establishment poll, all have Bernie Sanders ahead by 14 points in a Monmouth poll, by 3 points in an ARG poll, by 13 in a Fox News poll, and on average, Bernie Sanders is ahead of Hillary Clinton by about 6 points in New Hampshire. The path for Bernie, which is admittedly a difficult path, is if he can get Iowa out of the way with about 50% of the delegates and have a strong showing in New Hampshire. If in New Hampshire he gets 50 to 55% of the delegates, maybe that pushes him closer in Nevada, where we don't have recent numbers. The most recent poll is from December. He seems to have been down about 20 points. This is what he has to do. Will he do it? I don't know.
You know, honestly, I think he will, because in New Hampshire, he has a 2-to-1 lead margin amongst voters 45 and under. He's leading in every demographic in New Hampshire. So he's going to perform well. Like we said with the older polls from last month, they're almost irrelevant. So we have no idea what's happening in Nevada or South Carolina for that matter. I'd be very interested in seeing some updated polling on that.
And, you know, as I talked about this earlier in the week, if he does well in New Hampshire and Iowa, maybe the 20-point deficit that he had, at least last month, in Nevada shrinks to 8 to 10 points. Now, after 3 states, he still has about 42% of the delegates. Maybe that pushes him closer in South Carolina. South Carolina is the first real test because
Right.
we have the heaviest of the first 4 states of a non-white electorate, and he was down something like 50 points to Hillary Clinton. That is going to be the real test, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on what may happen there.
I think when he's putting a concerted effort into black colleges and black churches and really hitting the ground hard, trying to unlock the minority vote, particularly the African American vote, away from Hillary Clinton.
Why has he not been able to do that sooner? Is it a name recognition thing where everybody knows about Hillary Clinton, or is there something in particular going on with Bernie and the black community?
I mean, if you want the real answer is that the black Democratic establishment is solidly with Hillary Clinton. They are just as problematic in the race for someone who's an outsider as anyone else. So he's not fighting against Hillary Clinton as much as he's fighting against the black Democratic establishment, which is why I put so much emphasis on groups like Black Lives Matter. If they really wanted to mobilize their political capital, then they need to shake loose that grip that the black Democratic establishment has on voters.
So, and I don't want to misunderstand what you're saying. The black Democratic establishment, you see them as working together with Black Lives Matter in a way that's hurting Bernie, or you see Black Lives Matter working to help Bernie in a way that the black Democratic establishment is not?
Exactly, the latter. So absolutely, the establishment is in lockstep with Hillary Clinton. Matter of fact, the black Democratic establishment went against President Obama originally in 2008. So they are in love with Hillary Clinton. They have been with Hillary Clinton, and they want to maintain the potential for power that Hillary Clinton provides. So they are working against Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders particularly needs a grassroots African American movement to release the black community from the stranglehold that the black Democratic establishment has by virtue of Hillary Clinton.
And I'm curious, initially, the biggest headlines in terms of protesting candidates that Black Lives Matter got was for protesting Bernie Sanders. Did that end up helping him in some way?
Oh yeah, I said that a long time ago back at Netroots Nation, that this is going to help Bernie Sanders because, one, it honed his message on minority issues, black issues, and then two, he was tried by fire, right? It was an opportunity, not Seattle, putting the shenanigans in Seattle aside.
Disaster there, right? Yeah.
Netroots Nation was poignant and useful, and I think he capitalized on it, and I think he has shown dramatic improvement because of it. Seattle, disaster, should never have happened. Hillary Clinton has not had that moment. No matter how much people in the media are trying to say she has not. And I think he has a resonance now with the black community, with grassroots black community, with people around Black Lives Matter, if not the official organization, right? They probably would never
that it exists,
that it exists, right? But the people who identify with it are more readily going to identify with Bernie Sanders than Hillary Clinton any day. And his best route is to connect with them and shake loose everyone from the black Democratic establishment. That's what he's fighting against. That's why he was like 40 points down in South Carolina.
Well, that will be the first real test on this issue for Bernie Sanders in South Carolina. We'll continue following it. For now, we will take a break and we will speak to medical ethicist Arthur Caplan next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Arthur Caplan, Director of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Langone Medical Center. We've been talking increasingly about genetic editing, and we covered the story of the 1-year-old girl with leukemia whose life was, at least for the time being, saved by the first procedure where genetically edited cells from a donor were implanted into her. And of course, as soon as we start talking about this, the emails pour in about the ethical and moral considerations of genetic editing. Let's start at sort of the broadest point. When you think about genetic editing, what are the moral and ethical concerns that you have, or at least that you most frequently hear cited?
Well, there are really two kinds of genetic editing. One is to change cells, either modify cells and put them into the body, as it was done with the little girl, or to try and use viruses to insert genetic material into cells. Say someone with cystic fibrosis who has a genetic mistake, you're trying to get viruses to insert corrected material right into the lungs of the person. There's also genetic editing that takes place to eliminate diseases that are inherited. There you're trying to modify embryos, you're trying to change the DNA, correct errors there so that the disease is not passed on to a child or to grandchildren or to any descendants. The first kind of genetic editing is called somatic cells, body cells. They're not inherited, you're fixing something in a person. It's controversial because there's certainly safety considerations. People have died in the middle of these experiments. There's some controversy about whether or not it's right to try and repair diseases using genetic engineering when we don't have enough animal data, but because some of these diseases, animals don't get them. But overall, I think genetically editing body cells is fairly widely accepted. It makes sense in that it's the individual who has to make the choice about whether they want to take the risk. The benefits may or may not follow. People understand when they have terrible diseases that they may die in these experiments, but I think overall the verdict has been review them carefully, make sure the science is sound, make sure the informed consent is good, and let them proceed. Where you really get pushback is when people are trying to change embryos, change things that are passed on.
And that's I've received emails from people who seem to have completely opposite views on that. Some say if you're going to make changes that would lead to subsequent generations, in other words, the children of those whose embryos are changed, not requiring the same edit, in other words, eliminating something that would be inherited, that's good. And others say, no, 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 that's not good because you're actually making changes to subsequent generations and they have sort of no choice over that. So it's interesting that I've received feedback from people with very, very divergent views on that particular issue.
Well, I think when we're talking about changing inherited DNA, modifying our descendants, there's really a couple of ethical concerns that the critics have. One is you just don't cross that line because the people affected can't consent. Your future daughter, your unborn grandchild, they can't say, I'll take the risk, try to fix my sickle cell disease, my hemophilia, my cystic fibrosis, whatever it is. I can't give you my permission. I have to say to that objection, I'm not impressed with that worry. I think parents make decisions for children all the time. We make them for newborns all the time. We do prenatal screening all the time.
Absolutely.
The fact is, people make choices for their descendants, and that's just a reality.
Absolutely. So now that we've said that you don't feel that that is a strong argument against that type of decision, what does strike you as a stronger argument there, or at least one we should pay more attention to?
I think when we're talking about genetic changes for heredity, looming over that area is the experience of Germany with eugenics, with trying to eliminate people who are disabled, weak, seen as burdens on society, seen as racially inferior. In our current world, we're hardly over racism, bigotry, and views that are anti-disability. So when people say, I want to get rid of bad things in future generations, part of the argument is, well, what is a bad thing? It's one thing to say, I don't want to pass on Tay-Sachs disease. Okay, that's going to kill the child, and it makes sense. I think it's hard to argue against that. It's another thing to say, I want to get rid of Asperger's, or I'm not sure I want to have a short child. Those sorts of things are differences. Are they diseases? Are they really problems that make people unhappy? So one key issue then becomes identify what it is you're talking about. How do you know when something really is a disease or just a difference? Clearly, some people, for example, in the deaf community would say, being deaf isn't a disease, it's a difference. We have our own language, we have our own colleges, we live happy lives, we contribute to society. You don't have to eliminate deafness. That's not something you have to genetically engineer out of the human species. Then the related issue is, what about the people who say, hey, great, as long as we can get rid of lethal or terrible diseases, why don't we improve ourselves? Why don't we make stronger, taller, faster, smarter kids? When you can do genetic changes that repair disease, you can also do genetic changes that enhance or improve, quote unquote, future generations. So I think the objections that we have to pay attention to are, how do we define what it is that we might try to fix without getting rid of all human diversity and just having, some perfect stereotype of the quote unquote healthy descendant? And then are we ready to go down a path that might open the door to really trying to improve our species?
How would you define, or how could we as a society figure out whether there's a sort of, approved list of what we can, quote, fix or change? I mean, some people emailed me saying, listen, David, this is going to happen sooner or later. The medical community is going to improve on these techniques. This is going to be available. Does it not make more sense to regulate and sort of have some approved list of procedures that you can and can't do? But then the problem is, who is in charge of deciding, and what would be a sort of moral and ethical way to decide what is and is not allowed?
Well, I think those comments are right on point. If you say ban it, no changes, nothing allowed, that's hereditary,
right,
it's not going to happen. Plenty of other countries, China, Singapore, many places in the world are going to be doing and using this technology to engineer diseases out of their children. It will take place. If the United States says, for example, no federal funds for embryo engineering, which right now is what we're saying, the major tool that the government has to impose regulations, to come up with that list, to designate a panel to do it, goes away. There's no federal funding. There's no lever to push on to make regulation possible. So what will happen here is a private market. The rich will drive what the technology does. Private companies will set up. They're not accountable to almost anyone in terms of the services they offer. By the way, that's what the infertility field looks like today.
Right.
A private market where single people, older people, you name it, anybody can use the services, and the clinics put in 5 embryos, 6 embryos, Octomom, etc. So we know what awaits us if we don't try to keep government funding present in order, in part, to allow us to shape or control the evolution of the technology. Look, I think it's silly to argue that we're not going to see efforts made to get rid of Tay-Sachs and breast cancer and prostate cancer and hemophilia and many, many other heritable diseases. No one is going to hold those people hostage for very long out of fears that we don't know where to draw the line. So we better be ready for a world in which people, at some point, if not tomorrow, in a few years, start to engineer embryos to get rid of awful, clearly terrible diseases.
Can you give us a sense, though, if it were up to you to sort of create a test or a question to decide, okay, eliminating hemophilia, making someone taller than they might be based on the 2 parents that they have, giving someone better than 20/20 vision. What sort of questions could we apply to determine whether a particular change should or should not be allowed, or is not ethical?
So at one end, we know that there are diseases that shorten lifespan and really contribute to clear dysfunction. And by the way, deafness and blindness are on that list for me. I understand why people say they can exist, either deaf or blind, and have great lives. But it's clear that not seeing and not hearing, these are dysfunctional states, and we could repair them.
Sure.
So better to be able to do them than not do them. It's not. Part of the issue then becomes, if we're going to go after these clearly dysfunctional, clearly life-shortening diseases, we better be careful to put in laws that say we're still going to support and respect people who don't choose to do this. Remember, it's not just a question of where do we draw the line. What if you say, I'm not going to fix cystic fibrosis in my kid? I'm going to have kids with diseases. Is the public going to turn around and say, hey, look, you could have fixed that. You chose not to. We're not paying for your health care. We're not paying for any disability programs. The blame's on you. You want to have kids that are sick, quote unquote. Not my problem. A big looming issue in a society that's becoming more and more individualistic. But to answer your question, I think each case has to be done on its merits. You're not going to find a single criteria that says, that's in or that's out. Somebody might say, freckles, let's get rid of them. And I think it's pretty clear we give an argument that says they don't affect lifespan, they don't affect dysfunction, they're just an appearance issue or a preference. We're not going to permit changes that allow us to eliminate freckling. I'm sure people are going to look at albinism. Albinos in our culture, a predominantly white society, not really discriminated against, not seen as the worst thing that can happen. In a lot of societies, Japan, Africa, albinism is a terrible disease. They stigmatize it. They want nothing to do with it. So I think it's going to have to be case by case, the burden on those to prove why it is that they want to have the disease eliminated. That's how I would handle it. I try to do it with a fair process, not so much a set of criteria that say, if you fulfill this, you get it. If you don't, you won't. Because I think it's going to change from place to place. And I think it's going to change, if you will, from economic situation to economic situation and so on.
Absolutely fascinating, super important questions that at some point will need to be answered. We've been speaking with Arthur Caplan, Director of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Langone Medical Center. Thanks so much for joining me again.
Thank you for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, I've got some video I want to discuss. Donald Trump, Republican presidential candidate, was at the Red Arrow Diner in Manchester, New Hampshire. He was having a sandwich. Reports vary as to what particular type of sandwich it was, but I'm going to cut to some video of him there, and we're going to talk about this. You can hear someone yell, "Enjoy the sandwich, you racist," and then they interview the woman who yelled that. And I think everybody's going to get a sense that there's something a little bit particular, a little bit unusual going on here, and we're going to talk about that. Let's take a look.
New Hampshire one just came out with a...
When I was leaving, I shouted, "Enjoy your burger, racist. I love New Hampshire," because I wanted to make sure that people remembered that he is racist, that he's using it to rally voters, and whether he believes it or not, it's working. And I do love New Hampshire. I wanted people to know that I was not just being antagonistic. Really, that I will have been the person who did my part to voice what I had to say. If I was silent in there, then I would just be agreeing with him tacitly.
All right, so she feels like she did her part. What I really want to get to here, we don't have to discuss the specifics of that. Here's what I really want to get to, and this is a conversation I've been having with many people. Racism now has become a word that in and of itself is used in many different ways by different people. So the right has taken, and I talked about this with Dave Rubin yesterday on his program, the right has taken to, if anybody claims to see racism, the right says, you're racist for making it about race.
Right.
Absolutely crazy to me.
Right.
Okay. There are some on the left who use the term racism, I believe, unfairly to stop certain conversations that maybe we should be having. So I'm concerned about whether the term racism now has become in and of itself a sort of diffuser or conversation stopper for everybody.
Yeah, it has. I think it's an overly simplistic word.
Right.
I think it makes a complex situation very binary, and we don't have any room to actually make progress, nor is it capable of really describing what's going on. Calling Donald Trump a racist really doesn't unpack all of the different problems that are going on with Donald Trump.
And sometimes people say, well, okay, what exactly is racism? Not a dictionary definition, but if we say, what are we really talking about when we say racism? What somebody might say, I'm not racist because I don't think less of people based on their race, right? That could be one way of looking at it. So then we say, well, if you're a politician and you propose policies that disproportionately negatively affect members of a particular race or religion or ethnicity or whatever, is the individual racist in the beliefs they personally hold about members of a race? Well, not necessarily. We don't really know. But the impact of their policies would be bad for members of a particular race. So is racism the right term there? I don't know. Maybe we need a new term.
We clearly need a new term because it's been co-opted by the right. They want to call anyone who talks about race at all. Matter of fact, they'll call us race baiting as just for having this conversation.
Right.
So there needs to be a new word, but I think not only a single word, but we need to fully unpack what it is that is happening, particularly with Donald Trump, with these policies. Are they individually a racist? I really don't care. Are their policies going to have a disproportionate effect on a particular race? I absolutely care.
We could imagine a scenario where a candidate, doesn't even matter who, right? Joe Smith, the candidate, he is at home and he really thinks that Asian people are just really bad people by virtue of being Asian. But as a matter of policy, he says, I'm not going to pass a policy that punishes Asians just because I don't like them. That's probably a racist, right? But in terms of the policies that they're going to propose, they're not necessarily going to have a racial impact. And I think maybe we should distinguish between the two. I'm not cheerleading for the guy who thinks less of people because they're Asian, though. Let me be clear.
Okay, so you've opened up a can of worms for me, particularly because of Donald Sterling. I did not care whatsoever that he was a racist bigot in his home. I have to remember this is radio. In his home, what I care about were the policies and the housing discrimination that he was involved in years before. And we get stuck on people's character and what they say and words that have no meaning and pay very little attention to the policies that are detrimental.
Very, very interesting. Lewis, I want you to chime in on this before we move on. What is your determination of the use of the word racism at this point in time?
That's tough because, well, I mean, you would think that no matter what, it comes down to what someone's personal beliefs are about people that are different from them.
That is racism.
And I think that I like to say that everybody's a little bit racist, right? I like to say that. But I think where it comes out much of the time, especially with politicians, it's in our actions. And, you could be, I would say, friendly with someone your whole life and never hear them say anything that would tip you off. They could still have these feelings and these sentiments, and I guess you have to
your
spot
focus
it.
Would be on actions.
You have to spot it in their actions, I guess.
We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2DavidP. Quick voicemail I received. Let's take a listen.
Hey guys, oh my God, this show is ridiculous. My wife and I are about falling off the couch here watching about Vanilla Isis up in Oregon. Oh my God, it's hilarious. Like chewing tobacco and mayonnaise. I mean, how white inbred can you get? This is just ridiculous. And aprons. Oh my God, how hilarious is this? This is just absolutely Yokel Haram. I love it. I heard Vanilla Ice is on Tom Hartman. I was dying laughing. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
Are you following Yokel Haram?
Oh man, I can't get enough of it. It's hilarious.
The list of demands is maybe the best thing I've ever seen. And I guess demands is wrong. The shopping list or whatever it is, it's amazing. It's just everything about it is unbelievable.
I mean, whoever came up with those, they won the internet. They won Twitter for at least the next 2 or 3 weeks because we got some good laughs out of that.
All right, we have a great bonus show today. Intel eliminates conflict minerals. We will also talk about Ringling Brothers eliminating elephants ahead of schedule and David Bowie's internet prediction. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.